Man, what a tournament we just had at the Mexico Major. We saw some big teams really underperform that were expected to make a deep run, and really we saw our first underdog victory in a major that we've seen in Siege. I thought I'd pick a few teams from across all the regions and how things went for them at the Mexico Major, what went right for some teams, and for a few others, what went wrong. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, hit subscribe if you want to see more similar content like this on its way to the channel, and if you've got any other friends that you think will enjoy this type of content that we're making, feel free to share it with them. Alright, now let's get into it. Let's kick off with the winning region of Brazil. But before we dive into the winning roster a little bit later, I thought we should take a look at a disappointing event from the invitational winners, Ninjas in Pyjamas. The expectation naturally was at an all-time high for this roster, as their last few months collecting an invite win and Copper Elite 6 win had a lot of people, myself included, believing that they were going to be the team to secure that third title in 2021. But this event showed how hard it is to secure back-to-back international events, with the way Siege is ever changing even just in a couple of months from SI to Mexico, along with teams preparing counter-strats. Plus they had two of the most difficult teams when it comes to being hard countered in DZ and G2, and following their shock exit in the groups, Kamikaze spoke on Twitter about how they felt that every team knew what strats they were trying to employ, and none of their own adaptation was working enough. This of course is true, but I do have to say from a personal opinion that I think they were unusually sloppy in this tournament, whether that was to do with their communication or a weak drone game, maybe both. But regardless, many rounds they were shot in their back or gave up a massive man advantage when in the final execute in the round. We know this team to be so good at converting the opening pick to a round win, as they are usually really good at working off each other and making sure not to be traded out without another kill for them immediately after. But we saw none of that, as they looked really flat at this event, with Muzi being the only real shining light of their performances. Out of their two sets of 2 games against G2, DZ and DAMWON, they were only able to find 2 8-7 overtime wins against DarkZero, while taking losses to the remaining 2 teams. They played a lot of Clubhouse, a usually strong map for NiP, but it wasn't happening for them, as they continuously chose to return to that map in the groups and lost multiple times. The highlight games probably being 2 back-to-back losses to exciting and up-and-coming APAC roster, DAMWON Gaming Kia. Overall, this Korean roster secured many new fans at this event, myself included, as they not only put the APAC region on their back, being the only team from the Asia Pacific region to make the playoffs, but also just played a really refreshing style of Siege. Their first game against G2 was really cool to watch, as something I noticed that they were doing was using utility tricks, strats and angles that had been around for a while but are massively underused despite being very effective. Stuff like the full wall open Hibana trick was nice to see, as this is the type of stuff that made me fall in love with Siege in the first place. They were a really creative team, likely with a great support staff behind them, along with having the big gunners you need at this level in the likes of Yas and Rim. So I'm sure they will take this experience back to APAC North and can be motivated by the fact that they were able to silence some of the best teams in the world, along with the world champions themselves, and I'll be keeping an eye out for them in APAC moving forward, as I am now a converted DAMWON lover. It's always fun to root for the underdog, but this team and its fundamentals are really encouraging and lead me to believe they will be a formidable team if they stick together and keep grinding. And honestly, for APAC as a whole, this was a deceivingly strong tournament for the APAC sector, and arguably their best showing so far. You would be fooled by looking at the raw results and only seeing DAMWON progress from groups, but Invictus surprised many by holding their own in the group of death, capitalizing on a weakened TSM beating them twice, along with forcing the major finalists Empire to overtime where they just lost out to the Russians 8-7. Plus, looking at Group A, Cyclops beat Sonics twice and major winners Team 1 once 7-2, and in the reverse fixture, if they had been able to find one more round against Team 1, they would have knocked out the champions before they even had a chance to make that winning run through the playoffs. Add in the missing Knights roster, and the future is looking good for APAC. This region are pioneers of their own colourful playstyle, and Cyclops specifically are arguably the best shield team in the world. Plus, this return in 2021 to consistent international gameplay throughout the year will be a big help to this region that has struggled to have access to consistent tier 1 scrims and international experience, so I look forward to what Asia Pacific will have to show in the next few events. Now, as mentioned, it's time to get into our Mexico Major winners, Team 1. This relatively new formed roster were not high on many people's lists to make a deep run in Mexico. I personally mentioned in my previous video that I thought they would make it out of the groups after their second place finish in the Copa Elite Stage 2, but I would be straight lying to say I saw them getting any further than the semi-finals at best. They got off to a shaky start at the event, taking losses to all 3 other teams in their group, only finding 1 point in 3 games in a 7-8 OT loss to Sonics. They didn't look to have the confidence we've seen from them in the last few months, and they were falling victim to there being too much pressure on Alamau and Levy to carry the team, with the supports having a poor showing, and their other fragger, KDS, who can often be the difference maker for this team, having a quiet few games. By the end of the second day and their final game in Playday 2, they needed to turn it around in a major way to have any chance of making it to the playoffs. And out of nowhere, they did, as I think in all of Siege, this team is one of the most momentum-based teams, understandably as a very young and newly formed roster, as when they are smiling and having a good time, something gets activated in this group of players, and any sort of pressure seems to be lifted off their shoulders, being ice cold in clutches and low time situations on attack. We saw this, as for the remaining games in the groups, they made a flawless run, not dropping a single map. The worry was, however, that they had left it too late regardless of how well they were playing now, but they had at least given themselves a fighting chance and kept the fortune in their hands, as they needed to pull off a miracle against Cyclops to displace them from second, needing to directly beat them and not drop more than 2 rounds. It seemed generally and statistically to be slim chances for Team 1 as they headed to Consulate, a risk well taken as compared to a map like Clubhouse or Oregon, where it's much easier to find at least 3 rounds across your defenses and attacks. So heading to what you could call an unstable map like Consulate, it's easier to secure a blowout win where you're just better than the team across both halves and can more easily find attacking rounds. And there was something in the air as history was made. They started off by racking up 3 attacking rounds, but it was followed strongly by Cyclops finding 2 rounds of their own, now only needing 1 round in 4 attempts to send Team 1 home. But as I mentioned, when Team 1 are feeling it, they play with no pressure and do not fold, as some really close rounds, including a quad kill and essentially a 1v4 including a Monty in the post plant, saw the Capcan of Neskin save his team from the jaws of defeat. And knowing that they went on to win the whole event just makes plays like this even more clutch and iconic.
So Monty, not for the second day in a row.
It's 1v3, guys. It's 1v3.
Last one left standing. He's going in for the plan. Can he do it? Lagonis is down. He's got to clutch it out. Suzuki loses the shot. Addington, it's the Monty 1v1. You don't win these, I'm afraid, Team
Gotta pick
1.
Lagonis up.
The C4 cannot. He won't be able to get Lagonis up, Tim. Oh no, no way. No way does he get him back up. They could do this. They've killed him. It's a quadra kill. We're going to round 9. Team 1, 1 round away from a tiebreaker.
This is hard.
You could see the devastation on the face of the Cyclops coach every round that slipped away from them to deny Team 1 the tiebreaker or give them the outright loss. And after that save from Neskin, Team 1 were now at 6-2 and they were about to play the most important 3 minutes of their career so far. And Neskin was understandably fired up after that clutch from the round before, as he collected a 3k and nailed them down into a part of Siege history, forcing the first ever tiebreaker match we've seen in Siege esports. Magical stuff. Honestly, it wasn't even really close, as Siege is a mental game, and at this moment, both these teams were at the other end of the spectrum to each other. Cyclops were broken from just not having enough concentration to find one more measly round, even after getting the diffuser down twice and it seeming to be a done deal. Whereas Team 1 had unlocked a different level of clutch mentality, and felt like they had some sort of force behind them that allowed that to happen. We headed to Chalet, a strong map for both teams, but Team 1 ran with the momentum and shut out the game convincingly 7-4 in a well-rounded team performance that they needed to keep it from being a scrappy map. With that, Cyclops were knocked out and Team 1 completed the miraculous comeback run in a hype Group A, off to meet DarkZero in the quarters. And from here on out, no one was able to stop their heater run and compete at a level equal to Team 1, as they ran through DZ 2-0, Liquid 2-1 with a 7-0 victory on Consulate, the first of the tournament, then met Empire in the grand finals. They started off in the finals weakly in map 1, losing firmly 2-7, but they still were playing with no pressure and a positive mindset, as the Team 1 composure continued to be incredible, answering back on map 2 with a 7-2 of their own on Chalet, and then an 8-6 win on Coastline to be 2-1 up in the series. Empire had their own stakes to play for though, and brought the series even on Consulate, a tough ask considering Team 1's form on that map at the major. But the Russians did, and we headed to Villa for a glorified best of 1 to decide if Europe or LATAM would be taking the major back to their respective region. Unfortunately, Empire started to get sloppy, and an accumulation of their problem in this series started to flourish, as for another map, we only saw a few players on the team able to have an impactful performance at one time, and this time it was just too much for those 1 or 2 players to carry. Meanwhile, for Team 1, the mental clearly wasn't broken as they kicked off their Villa attacking half with a great flawless round, Neskin finding a double opener to start his road to redemption after a big misplay on the final round of the previous map. As for Empire, yes, Joystick was stepping up, but now top performer of Consulate Dan and Coastline MVP Scyther along with Shepherd were nowhere to be seen after 4 rounds, being on 0 kills each. Empire's coach called a timeout as the match was spiraling out of their control, and it continued to, as Team 1 collected a really strong 5-1 attacking half, Empire really struggling when roaming or anchoring to win their gunfights and hold their power positions. Team 1 swept Empire off their feet on the Brazilians' first defense, now at 6-1 on series point, heading to Kitchen to try lock in the victory. So we would need to see one of the most iconic miracle comebacks from Empire to even the round count, and before that, Dan and Scyther would still need to find their first kill of the map. And they couldn't, both ending the map with 0 kills, as once again the Team 1 players just seemed more switch on, with the usual backline player Lagonis stepping up front and centre on Pulse, clutching a lovely 1v2 to win this new roster, the Mexico Major. Honestly, it was a bit of a shame to see Empire capitulate on that final map, but that's how the cookie crumbles sometimes, and it shouldn't take anything away from Team 1, as they were the ones who kept up the consistency and punished Empire for their drop-off. It's truly crazy that a player like Lagonis in 2020 was just grinding out in the BR6 on Black Dragons, not really achieving anything more than maintaining their league spot, to then disbanding and Lagonis putting together this new roster and just getting better and better all the way to this point. Crazy how that Tiebreaker Cyclops game was the catalyst to a major victory. Literally 1 round away from not being here. That Monty post-plant clutch led all the way to this. Incredible stuff that renews your love for Rainbow Six Siege esports. Honestly, I was watching Lagonis on his stream before the event started. I never would have thought that a few weeks later, they would be the team to rise to the top of the major. Congrats to Team 1, and commiserations to Empire for giving it their best shot. In North America, I wanted to specifically mention DarkZero, who despite being knocked out in the quarters by Team 1, put in a good performance to show what the future of this roster, and specifically the younger, less experienced players, might go on to achieve at upcoming events later on down the line. NJR was by far one of the most impressive performers at this event, and it was really nice to see, as ever since he's moved to DarkZero, he struggled to find his place in the squad and have that consistent impact he did back on Disrupt in his rookie season. But this event, we got to see the Disrupt NJR, as despite playing on slightly more passive roles compared to back then, he had the same aura about him that we used to feel, where if he was left unchecked or given enough space and intel by his teammates, he would punish you at any stage of the round, early or late. He was to me the star of his team at this event, and the highlight for me being a great ace he got on Smoke against G2. I also want to give a big shout out to Pambazu, who earned a lot of respect from me at this event. For a player with less than a year of Tier 1 experience, to be dropped in the deep end to help a struggling DZ from Stage 1 to change their playstyle, and then heading into a major against the best teams in the world with playstyles he's not even used to, he really shined. Despite a few understandable rookie misplays due to his inexperience, he looked confident in his gunfights. The bottom line of Siege is, you cannot afford to play scared. Even as a fresh player, other teams will not provide you the luxury of an easy game. You give space to teams like NiP and Team 1, and they will run over you with their gun skill and coordination. I can't imagine how nervous he must have felt playing against the world champions NiP and every other team they faced, but he still played confidently and got about the map as his roles permitted. A big shout out for this has to go to BC and Min also, as they clearly have installed a belief and mentality in Pambazu and NJR that they fully have to commit to their roles regardless of what teams they are facing. We should all keep a close eye on this very talented rookie, as I think it's safe to say if he stays in this positive environment and continues to get experience as a player, that he has more than enough potential to become another one of those iconic North American players we've seen over the years. And briefly on SSG, I think it's fair to say they underperformed, but honestly I think this tournament was so stacked, and Empire is probably the worst team they could have faced, as they are equally as competent with strategy, and when Joystick and Dan specifically are in their best form, they can match up with frags against players like Rampy and Faults. I don't think this is going to set them back much though, and possibly will make them even more motivated in NAL to secure more SI points and top placements to redeem themselves at the next invite and upcoming majors before that. Like I said, Empire wasn't the team they would have hoped to draw in the quarters, as Empire came to play after their solid invite showing. I don't think Joystick specifically was able to reach the crazy showing he had in the SI group stages, but Shepherd and Dan went big at this event, as Shepherd has just been heating up through EUL stage 2, accumulating in this event. Thinking back to the question I asked in my last video, if this recent run for Empire was a patch of form or a new ability to consistently play at the level they did when they were winning events, and I think the answer leans much more heavily now into yes. They have found a new formula built on their old ideologies that is still just as effective in this day and age of Siege. It's still not nailed on though, as I think this third and final stage of the season will be the deciding factor of their overall situation and where they sit heading into the next season and new era of Siege, where we are seeing other regions like LATAM and APAC starting to be a threat at every event, along with so many small but important game changes being gradually implemented. I love this team though, and Joystick always seems like a very humble guy in his interviews, so I hope all the best for this incredibly talented team. And finally, I had to leave my favourites till last, BDS. Similar to SSG, I'm sure they will feel they underperformed at this event, but a semi-finals is a commendable placement considering, as mentioned, the amount of stacked teams that were present. To win this whole event, even if not in a direct matchup, as BDS you will need to outrun teams like Liquid, NiP and SSG, just to name 3 out of the event where all 15 teams were fully competitive. Even the few teams who wildly underperformed like NiP and TSM, or underdogs like Invictus or Furia, put up a fight on some maps to try and throw a wrench in the plans. And hey, isn't that pretty much what Team 1 did at this whole event? Pulled off what wasn't meant to happen? From being 1 round away from being knocked out in a post-plant retake, to winning the whole event to almost everyone's surprise. You love to see it. But anyway, back to BDS. They were literally 1 round away from the finals in their semis against Empire, and they were strong throughout the groups, so there's a lot to be proud of. But for the quality of players and synergy on this roster, I'm sure they will feel disappointed about another top 4 finish with no victory, as oddly enough, the day I'm writing this on the 23rd of August marks exactly 1 year since their last tournament win, where they beat G2 in the EU 2020 August Major. I hope that going into this next stage and the next year after that of competition, that they continue to push themselves, as there are many talented players like the players on NiP who continue to try and be the best of the best out there until it finally paid off. With the gun skill and game sense of this French roster, it would be a shame and honestly a detriment to the scene to see them start to fade away in the next few years. It will be nice to see them keep improving, and most importantly keep the faith that they are capable of winning an international event, which I believe they are. To summarise this event, this was one of the best few weeks of Rainbow Six Siege I've seen, and is the type of gameplay that makes you fall in love with Siege all over again. I'm already so hyped for the next major, and respect to all of Brazil for coming out on top again as the best region in Siege. There was so much talk in the group stages of SSG, APAC, BDS, Liquid and NiP, but it was the little brother of those latter 2 teams to bring another title home for that region, Team 1, in Brazil's first non-invite or finals major win. What players and teams impressed you this tournament? And do you think Team 1 will bring this great form into Stage 3 of the BR6? Let me know in the comments down below. There is now no excuse not to tune into the BR6 in Stage 3. The best teams in the world and the last 2 tournament winners playing every weekend. And that isn't even mentioning teams like MIBR and FaZe, who are also top quality. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more Siege content, esports and general R6 content and more, and bring on Stage 3. Peace.